The great stone throat of the Colosseum yawns, silent now, under a September moon. It is the 17th day of the month, and the 17-3rd year since the Christian Messiah. Deep in its buried bowels, in a passageway that modern guides do not show, a young woman waits. Her name is Livia. She is 19 summers old. Cold iron encircles her wrists, binding her to living rock. 3 hours have passed since the world ended. Above her head, on a stage of sand, her brothers met their death. He heard the great animal roar of the crowd, a sound that vibrated in her teeth. She felt the thunder of 50,000 feet stamping approval through the very bones of the amphitheater. Her brothers were princes of Dacia, men who read Homer and debated philosophy. They died like butchered livestock, their education meaningless, their pleas for mercy drowned out by laughter. The memory is a fresh wound, still bleeding. Livia wears the same silk gown from the day the legionaries stormed her home. It is a tattered, stained shroud now, crusted with the filth of her journey. The gods left her in it for a reason. The delicate fabric against the rough stone, the elegant weave against the rust of chains is a lesson in contrasts. It speaks of what she was, and screams of what Rome has made her. Heavy footsteps go in the corridor outside. The measured tread of hobnailed boots. Men's voices converse in the flat, administrative Latin of soldiers on duty. Their talk is of trivial things, the mundane business of a day's work. A key scrapes in the lock. The door groans open. 3 figures fill the doorway. One wears the tunic and tablet of an arena official. The other 2 are gladiators, their leather and bronze still damp with sweat from the arena. Fresh blood smears the shoulder of wine. The official reads from a wax slab, his voice devoid of inflection. Livia of Dacia, prisoner for -1-7, Category 3, assigned under the provisions of the victor's law to the gladiator Gaius Valerius Maximus as reward for victory in the afternoon games. He makes a mark with his stylus. The transaction is complete, noted, filed. The vast bureaucracy of empire reaches even here into this dank hall where a girl shivers. The gladiator called Gaius steps forward. He is perhaps 30, a map of scars written on his skin, his body a testament to survival. His eyes hold the flat emptiness of a deep, abiding fatigue. The official departs. The door closes. The lock turns with a final, metallic click. Now, they are alone. The room is small, functional, designed with a horrible specificity. Hearing rings are set at precise intervals in the walls. A wooden bench is fastened to the floor. Shallow channels are cut into the stone to carry fluids away. This chamber has a purpose, and it has been used. But what happens next in this cell is not what the architects intended. It will be an anomaly, a flicker in the records, a choice that reveals the monstrous machinery and momentarily interrupts. For the system beneath the Colosseum was no accident of passion. It was a cold, engineered component of statecraft. It transformed living women into currency, into rewards, into instruments of a calculated terror. Tonight, we will descend into that engineered darkness. We will trace the blueprints of humiliation, the legal frameworks of exploitation. You will follow the paper trail of suffering, preserved in waxened papers. We will meet the architects of this policy and the human beings fed into its gears. This is not a fanciful tale. The evidence is carved in stone, etched in law, whispered in the accounts Rome tried to burn. It lies in chambers sealed for centuries, only now giving up their secrets. Before we proceed, you must understand the nature of this horror. It does not lie in madness, but in chilling rationality, not in the collapse of order, but in order perfected for a dreadful purpose. The genius that built aqueducts and roads also built this. Stay, for you will learn may fracture the polished marble image of Rome you hold in your mind. Now, let the cool, damp air of the hypogeum settle around you. Let us return to that cell and to Livia. But first, we must comprehend the stage above her head, and why such a monstrous undercroft was necessary. The Flavian amphitheater rose as a testament to imperial power, a mountain of travertine and mortar that could swallow a small city's population in its maw. Beneath its wooden arena floor lay a second, hidden world, the hypogeum. a labyrinth of tunnels, cages, and lift, same masterpiece of engineering devoted to spectacle. But this was not merely architecture for entertainment's sake. It was a political engine, a pressure valve for a restless populace. It was the empire's gory theater, where the script was written in blood and the stakes were life and death. The message was unambiguous: Rome is supreme, resistance is folly, your death will be our entertainment. The scent of saffron could not mask the coppery tang of blood for long. The poet Martial wrote verses about men dressed as myths, set ablaze for cheering throngs. This was civilization's dark festival, and its logic was merciless. Prisoners of war were the raw material for this machine. Then, from conquered lands, Gauls, Britons, Daci and Ness faced the sand, or the slave markets. The women occupied a distinct category in the Roman calculus of conquest. Their value and their punishment was of a different dimension. It was a policy of total subjugation, of demonstrating victory in the most intimate, devastating way. The state did not leave this to chance. It codified it, regulated it, made it routine. The systematic use of female captives was a tool, deliberate and refined. It served to break not just armies but the spirit of nations. The Dacian campaigns of Emperor Vespasian provided the human fodder. Fresh from civil war, he needed a decisive victory, a torrent of captives for his triumphant games. Livia's family was not caught by accident. They were targeted. Her father was a leader, a negotiator. To capture his children was to pluck the future from a people. To parade them in Rome was to erase that future before the eyes of the world. A military dispatch lists heard utter of the Dacian noble Decebalus Esther Prox, 18th, suitable for triumphal display. She was inventory before she ever saw the Seven Hills. To grasp what awaited her, you must see the games as the Romans did not as sport, but as semiotics. Every death, every gesture was a symbol. Criminals died spectacularly to affirm the law's terrible power. Gladiators fought to embody martial virtue. The women like Livia represented the conquered land itself, its culture, its lineage, its honor. Their fate was a lesson written on the body. The Roman senator, Tonicus Capito, argued the point plainly in the Curia. He said the spectacle of noble women broken served as the ultimate deterrent. Dead men might inspire songs of vengeance. Broken women inspired only shame and silence. This was the grim, pragmatic heart of the policy. It was terror, administered by clerks. The reward system was its engine. A gladiator who fought with particular ferocity might turn a purse of coins, or he might turn something else, temporary ownership of a Category 3 prisoner. The message to the crowd was multifaceted. It rewarded service. It displayed domination in its most complete form. It incentivized brutality in the arena. The economics were circular and efficient. Livia entered this system as a classified asset. Prisoners were sorted with bureaucratic care. Category 1, the very young and old, sent to domestic slavery. Category 2, common women sold in lots to brothels or labor gangs. Category 3, women of noble birth, of a certain age, reserved for arena services. The euphemism was transparent to all. Archaeology has given voice to these stones. Excavations reveal rows of small, identical chambers along an eastern corridor. Each has iron rings anchored at shoulder and ankle height. Each has a drain cut into the floor. Near each door is a small niche. Fragments of wax tablets found there bear chillingly dry notations. Prisoner 312 Britannic, assigned to gladiator Titus Flavius, for hours, requires 3 days recovery. This was not a dungeon of chaotic abuse. It was a factory, with scheduled shifts and quality control. Gaius Valerius Maximus was a product of this world, and now its reluctant agent. 14 years earlier he had been a free man in Gaul, a blacksmith's son. A trumped minus up tax charge ensnared his family. His father died in the mines. His mother and sister vanished into the slave markets. Gaius, strong and young, was sold to Eludus, a gladiator school. He learned his trade well. He fought as a Milo, behind a large shield, a patient and defensive fighter. This caution kept his heart beating long after more flamboyant men were feeding the worms. He survived, but a hollow man now lived behind his scars. The reward system had evolved during his career. Earlier, it was coin. Now, with Vespasian S wars flooding Rome with captives, access to women like Livia became standard premium payment. Gaius had claimed this reward before. Each time, it had left a deeper stain on his soul. The last time he had sat through the allotted hours, doing nothing. The officials noted his inconsistent performance. In the arena, such hesitation could be fatal. It marked him as a piece that might soon need replacing. So, when he won his match that September afternoon, the victory tasted of ashes. He knew the script. He knew a young Dacian woman, who had just seen her brothers slain, waited in a cell. He knew his own survival might depend on following his orders. The system permitted no conscience, only function. Livia knew nothing of the gladiators' turmoil. Her world had ended 6 weeks prior. In fire and steel, she remembered a home in the Carpathian foothills, tutors, music, the scent of pine. Then came the legionaries, ignoring her father's offers of treaty. Her parents died in the assault. She and her brothers were taken alive for their symbolic value. The journey to Rome was a 5-week descent into hell ages, filth, hunger. Her brothers tried to shield her, whispering empty hopes. In Rome, they were processed. Her brothers were sent to the arena. She was forced to watch. She saw them given clumsy weapons, saw them stumble, saw the professionals finish the work. She screamed until a guard gagged her. Then she was dragged below, classified, chained. She was told she was a reward. Now the man who had earned her stood in the doorway. She did not say a conflicted soul. She saw her own incarnate's cardaments, and inevitable. She lowered her eyes to the floor and braced for the blow that did not come. Instead, she heard the rustle of leather and bronze as he sat down. He settled his back against the wall opposite her. The silence stretched, thick and strange. Livia slowly raised her gaze. The gladiator was not looking at her, but at some middle distance, his face unreadable. "I will not harm you," he said, his Latin clear but accented. The words hung in the damp air, incomprehensible. "I will sit here until the time is done. Then I will leave. You will have for hours of peace. That is all I can give." Why? The word was a Dacian whisper before she found the Latin. "Because I watched you this morning," he said, still not looking at her. "You refused to kill your friend. You chose your honor over your life. In 14 years, I have never been so brave." A crack opened in the dam of her numbness. Tears, hot and silent, began to course through the grime on her cheeks. He turned his head away, granting her the dignity of private grief. For a long time, there was only the sound of her quiet weeping in the distant, muffled roar from the world above. "The woman I refused to kill," Livia finally said. "Her the Oisra, Andrada. What became of her?" "I do not know," Gaius admitted. "She was taken to another cell. They will punish her defiance as they punish yours. They will break you both, slowly. Then your mercy is pointless. It changes nothing." "It changes these for hours," he said. "That is not nothing." So, in that room designed for violation, an astonishing thing occurred: a conversation. To human beings, from opposite ends of the empire's crushing machine, spoke. He told her of Gaul, of the tax collector's lie, of the ludus, of the slow death of the boy he had been. She spoke of Dacia, of her father's library, of her brother's laughter, of the journey and the cage. They could not save each other. They could not alter the machinery grinding around them. But for 4 hours, they were not prisoner and gladiator, conquest and conqueror. They were simply a man and a woman, acknowledging a shared druhen. When a guard's knock finally came at the door, Gaius stood. "I cannot ask for you again," it would be noted. "I understand. I'm sorry it is not more." "It was more than I believe still existed," she said. He left. The door shut. The lock turned. The fragile bubble of humanity popped, and the cold, silent darkness of the cell rushed back in. Livia would die 12 days later, not by violence but by fever. Infection seeped into wounds left by previous assignments, festering without treatment. A clerk would mark a wax tablet: prisoner for 117, deceased, cause fever following service, inventory reduced. Her body was thrown into the Pudai coulee, the mass graves beyond the city walls. Andrada perished a day before her. Gaius learned of Livia's death through the grim gossip of the Hypogeum. The news carved a hollow space. Inside him he had not known was empty. He began refusing all Category 3 rewards, accepting only coin. Officials summoned him. His arena performance was still profitable, but his deviation was a problem. Systems demand consistency. A compromise was struck. He would fight more dangerous, lucrative matches. If he survived, he earned more money. If he died, he ceased to be a complication. He survived for a time and began speaking in careful murmurs to other gladiators. He asked questions that had no safe answers. Why do we fight for rewards that deem us? Are we not just slaves in gilded armor? He planted seeds of doubt in a soil meant to grow only obedience. 3 years later, in a desperate melee, a blade found his thigh, severing an artery. The arena doctor, a Greek of rare skill, saved his life, but left him with a crippling limb. His fighting days were over. His owner, calculating the value of a legend's grateful freedom, released him. Gaius Valerius Maximus was free at 30-5, adrift in a city that had no use for a crippled killer. He drank to forget the faces of the men he had slain and the woman he had failed to save. One evening, lost in wine, he met a woman with a Dacian accent. Her name was Camilla. She too had been Category 3, had survived the chambers, had been sold to a brothel, then freed. He told her of Livia, of the 4 hours in Chamber 17. He wept for a stranger who shared her nightmare. An unlikely partnership formed from shared wreckage. He had a little money, and she had street wisdom forged in survival. Together, they opened a tavern in a squalid quarter. It became a sanctuary for those spat out by the arena's machinery-freed gladiators. Former slaves, the broken and the lost. For 20 years, it was a small, dimly lit testament to a different possibility. Gaius died there at 50-5. Camilla kept the tavern running a while longer. No grand history records this. Only tax rolls and a senator's complaint about disreputable establishments hint at its existence. But for 2 decades, it was a place where kindness was not yet extinct. For centuries, the Hypogeum slept beneath rubble and earth, its secrets buried. Modern archaeology has awakened it. Lasers and trowels have mapped its corridors. In the eastern sector, they found the chambers, the iron rings, the drains, the niches for record tablets. Imaging technology recovered ghostly texts from impressions in the soil. Prisoner 312, assigned, for hours, recovery period. The clinical language of the past confirmed the darkest whispers of history. On one wall in Chamber 12, excavators found scratches. Not random marks, but a name, carved over and over. 17 times. Olivia. Was it Olivia? We cannot know, but it was Olivia. Someone, in that darkness, insisted on her name. She refused to become merely a number. She left her mark as faint and enduring as a breath on glass. The lesson of these stones is not one of simple barbarity. It is a lesson in the banality of institutional evil. Rome's greatness and its horror sprang from the same source of genius for order, for system, for administration. The same mind that devised aqueducts devised the classification of human suffering. The same hand that wrote just laws wrote the regulations for the allocation chambers. This is the chilling truth. Systematic cruelty requires dehumanization, bureaucracy, ideology, and economic incentive. Rome perfected the formula. It turned atrocity into policy, suffering into paperwork, human beings into inventory. The horror lies not in the scream, but in the silence that follows the clerk's notation. The women in the chambers were not just victims. They were messages. Their broken bodies were imperial proclamations, sent to the furthest corners of the empire. Resist, and this will be the fate of your daughters. But the scratches on the wall tell another, quieter story. The system sought to erase identity, to reduce a person to prisoner for 117. Yet, someone carved Livia. The machinery of empire could break her body, but it could not entirely extinguish her name. Gaius' choice was another scratch on the wall. It did not topple the Colosseum. It did not spark a rebellion. It gave one terrified girl for hours of respite before an inevitable death. The grand calculus of history, it meant nothing. In the realm of human conscience, it meant everything. It proved that even within a perfectly designed machine of degradation, a single gear could, for a moment, refuse to turn. Remember the cold feel of the iron ring. Remember the smell of damp stone and fear. Remember the administrative precision of the wax tablet. Remember the 4 hours of fragile talk in the dark. Remember the 17 scratches on the wall. Remember that civilization is not the opposite of barbarity. Often, it is merely barbarity, organized, refined, and written down in triplicate. Sand is silent now. The crowds are dust, but the stones remember. The drains remember. The faint, ghostly impressions in the earth remember. We must remember too. The city sleeps around the silent giant. A chill, ancient damp rises from the earth, seeping through the stones. This is not the Rome of sunlit forums and marching legions. This is the Rome beneath the feet of tourists, a kingdom of shadows and egos. Here, in the permanent night below the arena, the true cost of empire was tallied. It was accounted for not in coins, but in human breath. Not in territory conquered, but in spirits extinguished. Let us walk these corridors again, with the eyes of those who knew them not as history, but as a present and unending horror. The air down here has a weight to it, a composite scent. It carries the musk of caged beasts, the oily smell of machinery, the sour tang of human sweat and waste. It is the perfume of the spectacle's hidden anatomy. Light is a prisoner here too, admitted only in grudging shafts from ventilation slits far above. It paints pale, trembling stripes on the packed minus earth floor. In these stripes, you can see the footprints, the broad imprint of a guard's boot, the shuffling drag of a chained captive, the purposeful stride of an official. The path is worn smooth by an endless, grim procession. This is the backstage of a theater where every performance was final. The hypodrome was not a single space, but a network of specialized organs. To the west, the animal pens. The low, restless growl of a lion echoes down a side tunnel, a sound that vibrates in the chest. Thin, speaking hushed, respectful tones, their apprised beast is worth more than a dozen prisoners. To the east, the clang of hammers and the groan of ropes. Here, the great elevators are maintained. Wood is oiled, pulleys are checked, sandbags are shifted. The precision is military. A minus-timed lift could ruin an entire afternoon's entertainment. And then, in a quieter wing, the holding areas, the sound changes. Here, there is only the soft, broken sound of weeping that has no energy left for volume. A cough, the rattle of a chain. This is where Livia waited, in a room with 20 other women. They sat on stone ledges, wrapped in identical, coarse linen. Their hair, once dressed in the styles of a dozen nations, had been cut to a uniform, ragged length. The process of becoming inventory was already complete. They were numbers now, their past lives surgically removed. The guard's torchlight flickered over faces that were maps of despair, and stared at the wall, their eyes vacant, already gone. Others clutched themselves, rocking gently. A few whispered in their native tongues, snippets of prayer lullabies, the last fragments of a shattered self. Livia sat apart, her silk gown a bizarre, stained flag in the sea of gray. The other women glanced at it, their expressions unreadable. Was it pity? Resentment? The silk marked her as special, which in this place meant a target for a more focused cruelty. The guard who brought the daily gruel lay thin, gray sludge leered at her specifically. Still dressed for a banquet, noble lady? H.E.D. sneer. The feast is coming. The waiting was a torture of its own design. It was not passive. It was an active, gnawing thing. Every footstep in the corridor outside sent a jolt of terror through the room. Every rattle of keys made hearts stutter. They marked time by the distant, seismic roars from the arena above. Each roar meant a death, a maiming, a climax of violence. It was a clock ticking down to their own appointments. Livia learned the routine from a hollow minus-eyed woman from Britannia who had been there for 3 weeks. "They take you to the washing room first," the woman muttered, her lip unthick with a northern accent. "Scrub you raw, make you presentable for the customer." She spoke of it as one might speak of showing a horse. "Then they bring you to one of the small rooms. The rings are cold. The man comes in. They learn to go away. You learn to think of something else. The mountains. River. Your mother's face. The woman's own face was a mask. After they check you. If you're not broken, you come back here. You wait again. It was a cycle of dread, violation, and recovery, all administered with bureaucratic calm. The goal was to maximize utility, to keep the asset functional for as many transactions as possible. This was Roman efficiency applied to the human soul. Above, in the blinding sun, the spectacle continued. On the morning of Livia's defiance, the sand had been raked smooth, hiding yesterday's stains. The editor, the sponsor of the games, took his place in the podium. The crowd, a living, breathing entity of 50,000 souls, settled in with a rustle of tunics and a buzz of anticipation. Hawkers moved through the aisles selling sausages, wine, and souvenirs. It was a festival atmosphere. And the trumpets blared. The announcer's voice, magnified by cunning acoustics, rolled over the tiers. Citizens of Rome, behold the fruits of our Dacian victory. A hidden gate groaned open below the arena floor. Out stumbled the prisoners, blinking in the savage light. They were arranged in a pathetic line around the perimeter. The crowd's noise was not unified anger, but a layered cacophony. Cheers rained down from the cheap seats. Curious, appraising silence from the patrician boxes, poised through nutshells. The announcer narrated their fall, relishing the contrast between their former titles and their current debasement. CS1, a chieftain's son who once drank from golden cups, now he drinks from a slave's trough. The crowd roared with laughter. The humiliation was the first act. The men were given weapons. Not the balanced gladius of a legionary, but mismatched, nicked blades from the armory's discard pile. Livia's brothers, DCA Balas and cum Issachus, were pushed toward the center. They held the unfamiliar swords like poisonous snakes. The order was given. They looked at each other, and in that look was an entire conversation of love, despair, and apology. They began to circle, their movements clumsy, their strikes hesitant. The crowd's amusement curdled into impatience. Fight, 1,000 voices screamed, give us blood. Oi, guard jabbed to see Balas with a spearman a step. He stumbled forward, his blade swinging in a wild arc that opened a shallow cut on his brother's arm. The first blood. The crowd sighed, a sound of deep satisfaction. Now it had begun. The combat was ugly, a brutal slog without skill or grace. It was the very antithesis of the gladiatorial ideal. This was not martial virtue, it was the reduction of men to panicked beasts. When Issachus finally fell, it was not from a clean blow, but from a lucky, desperate thrust. He bled out onto the sand, his eyes fixed on his sister until the light left them. DCE Balas stood over him, his own sword hanging limp. He looked up at the sea of faces at the emperor's box, and in clear Latin he begged, "Mercy, grant me a clean death." The editor turned his thumb, not up or down, but in a slow, rotating circle, a signal for delay, for prolonging the entertainment. The crowd voted with a forest of downward, minus pointing thumbs. The verdict was clear. Herediarius and minus strident fighter glided forward. This was a professional, artist of death. He made it last. The trident was not a killing tool here, but an instrument of exquisite pain. Each puncture was precise, calculated to cause maximum suffering without immediate death. DCE Balas took 7 minutes to die, each one an eternity measured in ragged breaths and the crowd's escalating cheers. Livia saw it all. She was chained to a post directly opposite, her head clamped in position by a guard's rough hand. He was part of the display. The crowd could watch the life leave her brother's eyes, and then turn to watch the light leave hers. Souls were muffled by a gag, her body convulsing against the chains. Her suffering was a sideshow, a bonus feature. Then came the women. The announcer's voice took on a sly, salacious tone. And now the daughters of Dacia, well, see if their spirit is as unbreakable as their fathers claimed. The cruelty was ingeniously psychological. They were to fight each other. The winner would live for now. The loser would be executed on the spot. It forced them to become active agents in Rome's theater of cruelty. To save yourself, you had to destroy another. To refuse was to choose death. The first pairs fought with a frantic, terrible energy. It was not fighting, it was a desperate, clumsy scrabbling for life. Women who had shared holding cells knocked or at each other with dull daggers. The crowd loved it. It was a novel depravity. When Livia and Andrada worshipped forward, something in the air shifted. They stood, two young women in torn silken linen, daggers in their unmarked hands. They looked across the few feet of bloody sand. They saw not an enemy, but a mirror of their own terror. Andrada gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of her head. Livia's fingers opened. The dagger thudded into the sand. Andrada let hers fall a heartbeat later. Together, without a word, they sat down. They simply sat. The roar of the crowd died as if sliced by a blade. 50,000 people fell into a stunned, bewildered silence. Was a sound more powerful than any cheer. In that silence, two broken girls reclaimed a fragment of agency. They had nothing left but their refusal. They offered it to Rome, a silent, profound rebuke. The guards were confused. This was not in the script. Kicks and blows rained down. Livia felt a rib snap, and Rada's scalp was split. They did not move. They sat in the expanding puddles of their own blood and Rome's confusion. The editor conferred with his advisors, his face dark. To kill them now would make martyrs of their defiance. It would grant them the clean escape they sought. No, the punishment must be more profound. It must destroy the meaning of their refusal. The announcement echoed in the silent bowl. These bitches scorn Rome's mercy. They scorn the arena's justice. Very well, they will learn the price of their pride beneath it. Take them below. Let them serve until there is nothing left to serve. The crowd's approval returned. A wave of relieved vindication. Order had been reasserted. The rebellion had been catalogued and assigned a suitably horrific consequence. The machinery would grind them to dust. As guards dragged her away, Livia's eyes swept the stands one last time. She saw a blur of faces, a chaos of expressions. But in the section reserved for gladiators, she locked eyes with one man. He was not cheering. He was simply watching, his scarred face a mask of exhausted comprehension. It was Gaius. In that fleeting glance, a circuit was completed. The scene and the seer were connected. Back in the hypodrome, the punishment began immediately. The normal rules of recovery were suspended. Livia was taken not to the communal cell, but directly to chamber 17, post-chained in the standard position standing, arms raised to the rings back to the door. The pain from her broken rib was a white and minus hot spike with every breath. She dissociated. She traveled in her mind to the Carpathene foothills of her childhood. She was picking wildflowers with her mother. The sun was warm. The air smelled of thyme and pine. This mental refuge was fragile. A paper screen against a roaring fire. The first man came, then the second, then the third. She returned to the meadow each time. But the flowers were beginning to wilt in her mind's eye, the sun growing dimmer. When Gaius entered after the third, she did not look up. She was deep in her wilting meadow, clinging to the fading scent of thyme. His silence, his failure to approach, was so anomalous it pulled her back. She surfaced slowly, painfully, to find him sitting against the far wall. His mercy was a greater shock than any violence. It was an earthquake in the logic of her world. His confession of cowardice was the most honest thing she had heard since her capture. In their shared honesty, the roles imposed by Rome, the victorious brute, the ravaged prize melted away. They were just two ruins conversing in the dark. When he left, the silence he left behind was of a different quality. It was not the silence of abandonment, but of a gift given. It was thin and precious. He held it around her like a cloak for as long as she could. Her death was not dramatic. It was a slow, inward collapse. Infection, the great leveler of the ancient world, did the work. In the communal cell, she grew feverish. She shivered on the stone ledge while the other women moved away, fearful of contagion. The guards stopped bringing her gruel. Aim Atticus was summoned. a harried man with blood under his nails from tending to gladiators. He took one look at her flesh skin, her clouded eyes, the angry red lines spreading from untreated wounds. He shook his hand at the guard. "Gora," he said simply. To the assembly, euphemism for the slave market, but here, for the discard pile. She was carried to a side alcove and left on a pallet. There, in the half-minus light, drifting in undoubt of consciousness, Livia Avdicia died. Her last sensation was not of pain, but of a profound coldness, as if the chill of the hypogeum stones had finally reached her core. A slave whose job was waste removal found her. He checked for a pulse at her neck, shrugged, and wrapped her in her own stained linen shift. Her body was hauled up a service ramp, tossed onto a cart already holding the carcass of a band to dead criminals, and rolled out to the put Ikuli. Her name vanished from the world, surviving only as a notation in a ledger that would itself crumble to dust. But the system she exemplified endured. The Senate's debate on the lex captiva femina Rome was a masterpiece of Roman pragmatism. No moral philosopher stood to decry the practice. The discussion was framed entirely in terms of cost, benefit, and political effect. Senator Capito, having received the merchant's letter, argued for moderation as a tool of governance. A corpse cannot work, he reasoned. A woman driven mad in a week is a poor return on the cost of her transport. A system that allows for sustained utility is both more profitable and more terrifying. It whispers of a control so complete it can pace its own cruelties. The opposition, led by a former general, argued that maximum terror was the point. Break them quickly, break them publicly, he thundered. Let the story of their screaming reach their homelands before our legions do. It softens the ground. The law that passed was a compromise, a regulatory adjustment. It set limits, so many assignments per week, mandatory medical inspection. It was, in essence, a maintenance manual for human livestock. The goal was not to end the exploitation, but to perfect it, to make the engine run smoother and longer. And the engine did run. For decades, women from across the empire passed through its gears. Britons with tattoos spiraling up their arms, Judeans with fierce, devout eyes, Germans tall and fair. The faces changed, the languages of their whimpers varied, but the architecture of their suffering remained constant. The chambers were used, cleaned, and used again. The wax tablets worm-marked, stored, and referenced. It was a dry, administrative hell. Gaius' later life, his tavern, his quiet partnership with Camilla, these were not a redemption. The world offered no such scale to balance what had been taken. They were, instead, an act of salvage. They gathered the broken pieces the Colosseum had spat out and built a fragile shelter from them. It was a different kind of architecture, one of whispered conversations, of a shared cup of wine, of a place where a man could limp and a woman could speak her native tongue without fear. It was a pinprick of light in a vast historical darkness. When Gaius died, an old infection from his final wound finally claiming him, Camilla buried him in a pauper's field. She marked the spot with the river stone from the Tiber. She knew no Dacian rights, and he had forsaken the Gallic gods of his childhood. So she simply stood there in the rain and said, "You were not what they made you." It was the only epitaph he would have wanted. Centuries layered themselves over the hypogeum. The game ceased. The great drains clogged. Earthquake shook stones loose. The river flooded, depositing silt. The magnificent machine was buried by the detritus of time. Renaissance builders quarried its stone for Palazzo S. Shepherds grazed flocks on the ground above it. It became a myth, a rumor mentioned in text scholars debated as hyperbolic. Then came the archaeologists. Not the treasure hunters of old, but scientists with brushes and lasers. They peeled back the centuries with painstaking care. When they cleared the eastern corridor and saw the 20 doors, they knew they had found something significant. The iron rings, still fast in the walls, a nut for hanging lanterns. The drainage channels led nowhere but to a central sump. The niches by the doors were the wrong shape for religious icons, but perfect for holding a wax tablet at reading height. Then came the day an intern, brushing dirt from a wall in chamber 12, exposed the scratches. Livia, she called out, her voice echoing in the silent space. There's a name here. The project lead came over, his torch illuminating the careful, desperate carvings. 17 iterations. A record of endurance. A testament to identity asserted in the face of its systematic erasure. In that moment, history ceased to be an abstract concept. It became the tangible, heartbreaking act of a human hand, tracing her own name on the wall of her tomb. The modern debate is fried. Should these chambers be part of the tour? Can we pave them with walkways, install explanatory plaques, and funnel tourists through without making a spectacle of the very suffering that happened here? Or does sealing them away, keeping them for scholars, constitute another kind of erasure? There is no easy answer. Perhaps the greatest respect we can pay is to acknowledge the profound discomfort they inspire, to understand that the Colosseum's majesty is inseparable from this basement horror. That, the same civilization that gave us the concept of civis Romanus, the Roman citizen with rights and dignity, constructed a parallel system where those concepts were not just absent, but violently inverted. The lesson is not that the Romans were monsters. They were us, with a different set of permissible atrocities. Their genius was to build systems so effective they could modify agony without most of the participants seeing it as evil. They saw it as order, as reward, as policy. The warning of the hypogum is the warning of any system that values efficiency over empathy, order over mercy, and the abstraction of the state over the humanity of the individual. The scratches on the wall are a bridge. They are a message from a specific human being across to millennia saying, I was here, my name was Livia, do not let the system have the last word. And in the quiet story of a gladiator who sat down instead of advancing, we see that even within the most rigid system, the human heart retains a terrible, fragile power to choose. It is often a choice that changes nothing in the grand narrative, but it changes everything for the chooser. It is the difference between being a cog and being a person who, for a moment, stopped the machines turning. That choice echoes longer than any roar of the crowd. It echoes here, now in our own conscience, as we stand in the shadow of the ruins, asking ourselves what systems we serve, and what small defiant scratches we might leave upon their walls. The shadows in the hypogum are not empty. They hold memory. They hold the cold that seeped into bones from stone worn smooth by terrified shoulders. They hold the ghost of a whisper, a prayer in a language Latin ears dismissed as barbarian noise. To walk here is to walk through a fossilized screen. Let us go deeper, past the well-rotten narrative, into the granular reality. Let us examine the gears of the machine, one by one, until we understand not just what happened, but how it functioned with such terrible normalcy. The system did not spring forth, fully formed. It was iterated upon, improved. Its architects were not madmen, but planners. Its operators were not monsters, but men who went home to wives and children, who complained about the weather and the price of bread. This is the true horror, its absolute mundanity. Consider the journey, the supply chain of suffering. It began not in Rome, but on a foggy Dacian plain or a misty British hill fort, where a Roman officer, his face hardened by campaign, surveys the captured. His mind performs a swift, brutal calculus. The strong men will go to the mines their muscles have value until they break. The old and very young are discardable, but can be sold in bulk. The women, his gaze lingers. He looks for signs of nobility, finer clothing despite the grime, hands unused to labor, a bearing not yet completely broken. These are the special cargo. He marks them, not with cruelty, but with the dispassion of a quartermaster selecting grain sacks. They are loaded onto wagons. The journey to Rome is a process of making. The geography of their homeland recedes. The language of the guards becomes the only sound of authority. They are fed enough to survive, not to thrive. Dysentery and fever claim some. Their bodies are tossed by the roadside, the first of many notations of inventory loss. The survivors arrive not as people, but as problems to be processed. The port of Ostia teems with such human shipments. A clerk with an ink-stained tunic meets the convoy. He consults a manifest. Dacian nobles, female, lot 7, he mutters, making a tick on his papers. There is no eye contact. They are led to a holding compound, a sprawling, muddy yard surrounded by wooden fences. Here, They are washed in cold, communal troughs. Their own clothes, the embroidered wool, the fine linen are taken. They are issued the uniform shapeless, oatmeal-colored tunica of cheap fabric. This is the first profound violence of standardization. It erases tribe status, individuality. They become a category. Hive Lacius, a slave overseer with a permanent frown, walks the lines. She pokes a chin, checks teeth, assesses muscle tone and unbroken skin. He separates them with the point of his staff. You, there, you, and you, to the left. The left group is Levi's group. They do not know it yet, but they have just been promoted to a more specialized, more terrible form of commodity. They are now Category 3 Arena Reserve. Their value has just increased, and their suffering has been professionally scheduled. Their introduction to the Colosseum is not through the grand arches, but through a low, fortified gate at ground level, used for deliveries. They enter the hypodrome like goods into a warehouse. The scale of the underground city is overwhelming. It is a cathedral dedicated to spectacle. Ropes hum under tension. Winches squeal. Men shout technical instructions. Somewhere, a leopard snarls. The new arrivals are stunned into silence. This is the engine room of the myth above. They are marched to their holding cell. The guard, a man named Lucius who has done this for 10 years, gives the standard speech. His tone is bored, rehearsed. You are here by the will of Rome and the grace of the emperor. You will be fed. You will obey all commands instantly. Attempt no escape. Cause no disturbance. Your cooperation may improve your circumstances. The speech is a lie, and he knows it. Their circumstances have only one trajectory, but the fiction of rules is important. It imposes a framework, however false. It makes them participants in their own management. Levi's Salmet in the early days was an older Greek woman named Alpis, captured in a raid on a coastal village in Anatolia. She had been a midwife. Her hands, which had brought life into the world, now trembled constantly. She was philosophical in her despair. They are engineers of the soul, she whispered to Livia one night, her Greek melodic even in its sadness. They understand pressure points, not of the spirit. The waiting, the noise, the uniform, the routine, it is all designed to soften the will, to make the final act seem almost a relief. ALP was taken for her first allocation and returned an hour later. Walking stiffly, her eyes focused on something miles away. He did not speak for the rest of the day. When Livia tried to touch her shoulder, ALP flinched as if burned. The system was working. It was creating manageable, broken inventory. The bureaucracy was the nervous system of this operation. Every action generated documentation. A fragment of a recovered tablet lists expenditures for the maintenance of 20 Category 3 prisoners, 1 month grain, 3 mod ile entals, 1 modius oil for lamps, 2 sextor physicians visit 1 prisoner, fever, 5 se est urti. They are budget lines. Another records performance metrics gladiator quadratus victory in 3rd match. Crowd approval high. Reward tier 3. Selected prisoner for 111 Dacian. Duration standard. Post-minus allocation condition viable. Cleared for reassignment in 72 hours. This is the language of a stable, regulated business. The post-minus allocation condition viable is particularly chilling. It is a quality minus control check. The head clerk, a freedman named Secundus, took pride in his neat ledgers. He saw himself as a professional, a man who brought order to chaos. That the chaos was human agony was irrelevant to his professional self-minus concept. He was upholding a system. He was, in his own mind, a good Roman. This dissociation is key. No one in the chain had to confront the whole truth. The soldier captured. The merchant transported. The clerk catalogued. The guard secured. The gladiator claimed. The doctor inspected. Each performed a small, defined task. The moral weight was diffused across 1,000 shoulders, becoming too light for anyone to feel. The gladiators themselves were a complex variable in the equation. They were both perpetrators and prisoners. Their barracks were not much larger than the cells of the women they would visit. They too lived under the threat of the sand. For them, The reward system was a brilliant piece of psychological manipulation. It offered a simulacrum of power to men who had none. It was a transaction your violence above grants you dominion below. It twisted their need for dignity into a tool for further degradation. Some, like Gaius, felt the corruption of it. Many did not. A young Thracian named Brixus, new to the arena, bragged about his first reward in the baths. She was a fiery little thing from the north, he said, grinning. Fought like a wildcat, made it better. The older gladiators listened, some nodding, some silent. The boast was expected. To question it was to show weakness, and weakness was fatal. The system created its own culture, its own peer pressure. To refuse the reward was not just to reject a privilege, it was to reject the ethos of the ludus, to set oneself apart as something strange and suspect. Gaius' quiet refusal after Livia was, therefore, an act of profound social risk, as dangerous in its way as facing a superior opponent. The architecture of the allocation chambers themselves is a study in cold purpose. They were not dank holes, but dry, clean, and efficient. The walls were plastered and whitewashed. Hygiene was important. The wooden bench was sanded smooth to prevent splinters that could cause infection and reduce utility. The drainage channel was meticulously sloped, ensuring quick runoff for easy cleaning. The iron rings were polished from use. It was a clinical space, which made the acts performed there all the more monstrous. The contrast between the sterile environment and the violent purpose was a Rome in miniature civilization in service to savagery. Before an allocation, a junior official would perform a pre-minus inspection. He would ensure the chamber was clean, that a jug of water and a cloth were present for the gladiators' use, that the rings moved freely. He would then fetch the prisoner from holding. The walk down the corridor was a ritual of dread. Other prisoners would watch, their eyes hollow. The official would unlock the chamber, guide the prisoner, and fasten the restraints. His touch was impersonal, procedural. He would then leave, locking the door behind him. He would wait at a discreet distance down the corridor, not to eavesdrop, but to be available if called. He whittled a piece of wood to pass the time. He was a stage manager, ensuring the private performance proceeded without technical difficulty. What of the women who survived the system? Their stories fray into obscurity. Some, deemed non-viable, were sold to the lupinoria, the brothels of Rome. Their value was now low, their life expectancy shorter. They became part of the city's vast, anonymous underbelly. A few, through sheer chance or unlikely mercy, found a different path. Camilla was one. After her time in the chambers, an infection left her with a persistent fever. The arena doctor, the same sody rides who saved Gaius, marked her for disposal. But a slave trader, looking for cheap labor for a rural estate, put her in a lot of damaged goods. The estate was in Campania. The work in the vineyards was hard, but it was under the sun. The overseer was harsh but not inventive in his cruelty. It was a misery she could comprehend. She recovered her strength, though not her peace. Years later, a fire destroyed a portion of the villa. In the chaos, she simply walked away. She made her way back to Rome, not out of love for the city, but because it was the only place she knew in the empire. She found work in a laundry, her hands scrubbing the stains from the tunics of men who might, for all she knew, have been guards or officials or spectators. The city was a tapestry of hurt tormentors. She learned to become invisible, a skill honed in the hypogum. Then she met Gaius. It was not a romance. It was a recognition. The ghosts from the same machine, finding each other in the limbo of the free yet unforgiven. Their tavern was not a home. It was a bunker. The ale they served was thin, the wine sour. That the currency was not money, it was silence, and the understanding that required no words. A retired laniste, a gladiator trainer, would sometimes drink there, his hands shaking too much to hold a sword. He never spoke of the arena. He talked only about his garden, about the difficulties of growing figs in Roman soil. Gaius would listen, nodding. They shared a complicity that transcended their former roles. They were both survivors of the same fire, one who stoked it and one who was burned by it, now huddled together in the ashes. The archaeological record is a silent witness that refuses to stay silent. Beyond the scratches of Livia, other fragments speak. In the drainage sump of the allocation corridor, soil analysis revealed a high concentration of certain pollens, not from the local flora, but from plants native to the eastern Alps and Dacia. How did it get there? On the clothing of the prisoners, and their hair trodden from their feet. The very earth beneath Rome holds the dust of distant homelands, swept into the drains with the other waste. Microscopic analysis of the plaster in the chambers shows layers of repainting. The whitewash was repleed regularly, covering stains, scuffs, perhaps even earlier, fainter scratches. Each layer was a fresh attempt to sanitize, to reset the room for the next user. It is a metaphor for the entire enterprise, the relentless whitewash of atrocity with the bland paint of routine. Bone fragments found in the sump are small, often from fingers or toes. Forensic analysis suggests no violent trauma. They are likely the result of minor injuries: a stubbed toe, a torn fingernail that went untreated and became infected, leading to bone loss. These are not the bones of glorious death in the arena. They are the bones of neglect, of the slow, grinding attrition of the body in a system that cared only for its immediate function. They tell a story of mundane, accumulating pain. The philosophical and legal legacy of this system is its most insidious achievement. Roman law was famed for its precision and its concept of justice. Yet, it created a legal framework for this practice. The Lex Victoria Rum and later the Lex Captiva Femina Rum were not dark secrets, they were part of the legal corpus. Jurists debated their finer points. The contradiction is glaring. A society that produced Cicero's orations on justice also produced the legal codification of rape as military bonus. The resolution lies in the Roman concept of the ius gentium, the law of nations. This law applied not between citizens, but between Rome and the other. It was a law of power, not of rights. A captured enemy had no legal personality. They were res a thing. You cannot commit a crime against a chair. This legal fiction was the cornerstone. It allowed the Roman mind to compartmentalize. The moral universe of the citizen, protected by law and custom, ended at the city wall. Beyond was a realm where different rules, the rules of conquest and dominion, applied. The hypogum was the physical manifestation of that legal frontier, was a space where the ius gentium was administered in concrete form. This is why the bureaucratic record manuscripting was so vital. It was proof that everything was done or dynam, according to procedure, was the difference between murder and execution, between theft and seizure, between atrocity and policy. The paperwork legitimized. It transformed screams into data points. We, looking back, search for resistance. We crave stories of uprising, of secret conspiracies among the prisoners, of gladiators turning their swords on the guards. But the true nature of such systems is to make organized resistance impossible. The isolation, the constant surveillance, the psychological breaking, these are designed to prevent it. Resistance, when it came, was solitary, internal, and often suicidal. Livia and Andrade as sit-minus downstrike on the sand was a flash of pure, unadulterated defiance. It was a moral victory, but a tactical dead end. It guaranteed their destruction. Yet, its power resonated. It forced the system to reveal its full punitive face. It created a memory, however fleeting, in the minds of 50,000 spectators. It inspired one weary gladiator to a small act of disobedience. In the economy of the spirit, such acts are the only currency that holds value. They are the scratches on the wall of history. They prove that even when the body is utterly conquered, the will can still, in a final quiet gesture, say no. The final ghost in the hypogum is not a prisoner or a gladiator. It is the spectator, the man who sat in the stands, ate his lunch, and cheered. How did he reconcile his daily life with what he witnessed and, in some dim way, understood was happening below? The answer is perhaps the most relevant to us today. He delegated his morality to the state. Rome was his civilization, his order, his security. The games were his celebration of that order. The violence, no matter how extreme, was framed as a necessary demonstration of the power that kept his world safe. that brought him water through aqueducts and grain from Africa. The victims were not human like him. They were enemies, barbarians, the chaotic outside that Rome's walls kept at bay. Their suffering was proof of the wall's strength. He participated in a collective catharsis, a reaffirmation of tribal identity. To question the games would be to question Rome itself, to undermine the very foundation of his identity and safety. It was easier and more comfortable to cheer. This is the ultimate triumph of the system. It made complicity a patriotic act. It made looking away a civic duty. It transformed moral queasiness into a personal failing of weak nerves, not a justified response to atrocity. The stones of the Colosseum endure. They are photographed, marveled at, a symbol of eternal Rome. But the true monument is not the soaring arches above. It is the quiet, oppressive dark below. It is the 17 scratches. It is the bone fragment in the drain. It is the faded notation on a piece of pottery marking prisoner 417, deceased. These are the relics of a different truth. They tell us that civilization is not a guarantee of humanity. Often, it is merely the mechanism by which humanity is organized, beautified, and sold as tickets to the public. The story of Livia and Gaius is not a love story. It is a fault-line story. It reveals the crack in the magnificent facade through which we glimpse the endless, engineered night within. It reminds us that the most dangerous systems are not those ruled by tyrants, but those administered by clerks. And it warns us that the distance between the cheering crowd and the chained figure in the dark is not one of time or culture. It is a distance of choice, of complicity, of willful blindness, a distance we all must measure within ourselves, every day, in the arenas of our own world.